Do you know who I was when we met?
Yes, I did. I knew who all of you were. And that's why I applied to teach at Rosewood. But I promise you, though, I didn't know I was going to fall in love with you.
Don't.
I've lied about a lot of things.
Ezra, don't!
There's something interesting about how Pretty Little Liars asks its audience to remember certain relationships. Not just to remember them, but to romanticize them. Aria and Ezra in particular were framed as a love story that was complicated, forbidden, and ultimately worth waiting for. And for years, that framing worked. A lot of viewers rooted for them, defended them, and accepted the show's version of their story. But when you step back and really examine how that relationship began and what we later learn about it, the narrative starts to fall apart. Because this isn't just a story about a bad relationship or a messy romance. It's a case study in how teen dramas normalize inappropriate power dynamics, reward fan service over accountability, and blur the line between love and manipulation. So, in this video, I want to take a closer look at Pretty Little Liars through that lens, specifically focusing on Aria and Ezra, what the show asks us to overlook, and why their ending says more about the genre than it does about love. Let's start with something that feels obvious in hindsight but wasn't treated that way at the time. Why were Aria and Ezra a couple? Why were viewers encouraged to watch this relationship unfold and decide whether it was something worth rooting for when it was inappropriate from the very beginning? Because no amount of time passing, no emotional attachment, and no eventual legal consent actually changes how that relationship started. Aria and Ezra were never a fairy tale. They were never relationship goals. And they were never a dynamic that should have been idealized. If this storyline existed outside of a teen drama, if it were framed as a Lifetime movie, for example, the expectation would be very different. We wouldn't be debating whether they belonged together. We'd be waiting for the teacher to face consequences. Because what we were watching was a grown man engaging in a relationship with a 15-year-old student. That framing matters. It also matters that Aria wasn't the first underage girl Ezra was involved with. Before her, there was Allison. And while the show repeatedly emphasizes that Allison lied about her age, that doesn't remove responsibility from Ezra. Adults are expected to verify the age of the people they're pursuing, especially when those people are visibly young. When this situation happens more than once, it starts to feel less like coincidence and more like a pattern. And Ezra isn't the only example. Pretty Little Liars repeatedly placed adult men in inappropriate proximity to teenage girls. Ezra, Ren, Ian, Jason. Over and over again, these characters cross emotional or physical boundaries, and the show often frames it as romantic tension rather than something that should raise concern. At some point, it stops being about individual characters and starts reflecting a larger issue in how the show handled relationships. Now, to be fair, this is where things get complicated. Because despite all of this, there were relationships on the show that many fans, myself included, genuinely rooted for, especially when it came to Spencer. Spencer and Toby always felt like they were going to be endgame. But even outside of that relationship, before breakups, during breakups, and after, I still found myself invested in other people Spencer dated or connected with. Ren and Caleb are examples of this. And with Ren especially, the issue was never chemistry. It was age. If Spencer and Ren had been closer in age, their dynamic likely would have been received very differently. They matched each other intellectually, emotionally, and mentally. In some ways, their connection made more sense than his relationship with Melissa ever did. But the problem remains the same. Spencer, like Aria, was still a minor. No matter how mature she seemed, no matter how capable she was, no matter how strong the connection appeared, these were still adult men who failed to regulate themselves, failed to maintain boundaries, and placed emotional weight on girls who were not old enough or legally positioned to carry it. This pattern isn't unique to Pretty Little Liars. In a previous video and podcast episode on Gossip Girl, I talked about how teen dramas often prioritize fan service over long-term character integrity, especially when it comes to female characters. Blair Waldorf is a clear example. Over time, Blair showed growth. She demonstrated that she could move beyond trauma bonding and toxic relationship dynamics. But by the end of the series, that growth was undone. She once again made a major life decision centered around saving Chuck, with the show framing it as love rather than regression. Pretty Little Liars follows a similar path with Aria. Because despite everything revealed in season 4, Aria and Ezra ultimately end the series married. And that's where the narrative fully collapses. So let's briefly rewind. In season 4, Pretty Little Liars reveals something far more disturbing than a plot twist. Ezra didn't just know Allison, he was already inside her story. The summer before Allison disappeared, she was secretly involved with someone she called Board Shorts. Through Allison's diary and Spencer's relentless investigation, the truth finally surfaces. Board Shorts was Ezra. Spencer tries to warn Aria over and over again. She's exhausted. She's abusing prescription stimulants to stay awake, and she's spiraling. And Ezra notices. When he finds Spencer passed out at school, he doesn't help her. He files the information away. Later, during an argument with Aria, Ezra casually brings up Spencer's mental health history, her time at Radley. He reframes her warnings as delusions. He paints her as unreliable. At first, Aria believes him, until Ezra slips. He references details about Toby's supposed death, the motorcycle helmet, the tattoo, specifics Aria never told him. When she asks how he knows, Ezra lies. He says she must have mentioned it before. Aria agrees, but the doubt has already taken root. After Ezra takes her on a romantic weekend getaway to his writing cabin, Aria sneaks back there alone, not to relax, but to search. She checks beneath the floorboards, finds a hidden basement, nothing conclusive. Then she opens a book on the coffee table. Inside is a manuscript draft, Ezra's book, and in it the truth spills out. His relationship with Allison, his research, and the realization that Aria was never a coincidence. Ezra comes back, and Aria grabs the pages and escapes through the window, but forgets her keys. She runs into the woods as Ezra realizes she's still close. He starts looking for her. She hides, she runs, until she reaches a chairlift. Ezra gets on behind her without her noticing. And suddenly, she's trapped, suspended in the air, forced to listen. That's when Ezra finally admits it. He came to Rosewood to write a true crime book about Allison's disappearance. He already knew Allison. He believed her lie about her age. And he pursued Aria because she was Allison's best friend. Their relationship started as research. Only later, he claims, did it become real. And that's the most unsettling part. Not just the lie, but the patience, the planning, the way Ezra exploited a teenager's trust and used another girl's mental health to protect himself. This wasn't fate. It was surveillance. And the explanation doesn't erase what came before. It doesn't undo the manipulation. It doesn't justify the surveillance. And it doesn't change the fact that he was her teacher. What makes this revelation even more troubling is that Ezra had already been romantically involved with Allison. So this isn't just about betrayal, it's about pattern recognition. One adult man, two teenage girls, both central to his personal and professional interests. For a brief moment, the show allows Aria to walk away. It allows space for the weight of that truth. But then the narrative begins to soften. Ezra is injured while protecting the girls. He's reframed as heroic. Later, the show clarifies that while he wasn't Big A, he also wasn't innocent, just separate from the main villain. That distinction does a lot of work. And just briefly, before we go any further, if you've ever had a complicated relationship with this storyline, if you rooted for Aria and Ezra back in the day, or if you're watching this now with very different feelings, I'd love to hear your perspective. You can pause here, leave a comment, or just sit with it as we keep going. And if you enjoy these kinds of deep dives where we slow down and really examine the stories we grew up with, liking the video or following the podcast helps more than you might realize. All right. Let's keep going. Instead of holding Ezra accountable for what he did, the focus shifts to Aria's emotional pain over being lied to rather than the reality that she was manipulated by an adult in a position of power. By the end of Pretty Little Liars, Ezra isn't meaningfully challenged. He's rewarded. And that's the core issue. Season 4 reveals Ezra fits not as a misunderstood romantic lead, but as a calculating adult who built a relationship with a minor on deception and surveillance, while also having a prior sexual relationship with her missing best friend. Yet the show frames their ending as a win for love. And in doing so, it reinforces a familiar message in teen dramas. That romantic framing can be used to soften, excuse, or outright erase profoundly unethical behavior. By the time Pretty Little Liars ends, the story isn't really about whether Aria and Ezra loved each other. It's about what the show chose to forgive. Season 4 gives us all the information we need to see Ezra clearly, not as a tragic romantic lead, but as an adult who manipulated, surveilled, and pursued teenage girls while holding power over them. And instead of letting that truth reshape the narrative, the show ultimately rewards him with a happy ending. And that choice matters, because when stories frame predatory behavior as complicated romance, they teach audiences, especially young ones, that harm can be softened if it's wrapped in love, loyalty, or time. Pretty Little Liars isn't unique in this. It's part of a larger pattern in teen dramas where women's growth is sacrificed for nostalgia, ships are prioritized over accountability, and uncomfortable truths are buried under romantic framing. And revisiting these stories now isn't about rewriting history or shaming viewers for what they once enjoyed. It's about asking better questions and being honest about what these narratives were really teaching us. So that's our look at Pretty Little Liars. Not the ships we were told to root for, but the patterns underneath them. Revisiting stories like this as adults gives us a kind of clarity we just didn't have back then. Not to tear them down, but to understand why certain narratives were normalized and what they were quietly asking us to accept. If this breakdown resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to leave a comment, especially if your perspective on Aria and Ezra has changed over time. And if you enjoy deep dives like this, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, or follow the podcast. It really helps support the work and keeps these conversations going. Thank you for listening or watching, however you're here. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll see you next time.